Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here, or at Activate Learn on Twitter. It is time for another book review, and I've got a fiction book this time around again, and it is Tussaud by Belinda Lyons-Lee, who is an Australian author, and this is her first book. I got this book at the local library. I saw it on the new books shelf, and it looked really interesting for me because the cover looked very the cover looked very steampunkerish, doesn't it? And what is it about? It is about Tussaud, okay, but there's a few more other characters in this book that make it really interesting. We find Tussaud, who was the lady who used to collect the heads from the royalty who were guillotined during the French Revolution. She would make death masks out of them and then create wax figurines from those death masks. We find her in the early 1800s in a workshop, and she is slightly mad being surrounded by these death masks and her wax figurines, and she's obviously thinking about the past and lamenting where her sons are. She gets approached by this magician by the name of Philidor. Philidor actually is not really a magician. He is someone who kind of makes these automatons, which are mechanical, real human-like, I guess, figurines. And he has this idea that if he goes into partnership with Madame Tussaud, with her wax figurines and his expertise with the mechanics, he could create these automatons and then incorporate these as part of a performance in his new Phantasmgoria show that would wow, amaze and horrify the punters who would come along, pay their money to be entertained by something so fantastical and out of this world. And so they negotiate the price, and obviously he's a bit of a sneaky character and he wants to get paid more of the profits, given that he's a man. I mean, this is the 1800s, you don't give that to the women. But Madame Tussaud is actually quite a smart cookie. She's quite, I guess, cunning herself. She says yes to this proposition. But at the same time, they get invited to go to the Welbeck Estate because this eccentric duke by the name of William Cavendish invites them to the estate to commission them on a piece of work he wants them to do. And this work, he wants Tussaud to build a wax figurine of a young girl by the name of Eleanor, who he knew many years ago growing up on the estate in his childhood, but had died with some sneaky, suspicious circumstances. So you could see the intrigue that's happening here. Now, this eccentric duke does not communicate with people face to face. In fact, he's such a reclusive. He doesn't even have his staff look at him. And so he communicates with people through letters. So he's in his room, he writes a letter, he puts it out into the doorway, they read it, they write a letter back, and so that's how they communicate. But throughout the book, I'm not going to go into the whole storyline because there's a lot of twists and turns. In the first half of the book, I must admit that I found the first half a lot more enjoyable than the middle bit. The middle bit was actually going into the different storylines of each of the people. So we learn more about Philidor's relationship with his brother Panetti, who's also a magician, and we find out who Panetti is again and his connection with Tussaud. We also find out who William Cavendish is and how he's got this alter personality, alter job as well. And we find out his eccentricities with regards to how he's built these 15 miles of tunnels under his estate just so that he could move around secretly so that no one knows where he is or whether he's inside the estate or not. And so all these little storylines get fleshed out in the middle of the book, and then there's a bit of intrigue as to who killed Eleanor at the end, which again ties the book's story. Now, what I found most interesting about this book is not the story itself. The story itself, it's really all the characters in this book were real in history, but what the author has done is create a really fantastical story around them. So for example, Panetti and Philidor were not brothers. Yes, they were kind of like in the same line of work they were illusionists and performers and magicians at different times, but she's put the spin on that they were brothers. The other thing I loved is it got me into a rabbit warren of exploring, I guess, how people were entertained in the 1800s and I learnt more about automatons and how freaky they are, in how real they were with regards to how they created these machines with mechanics to get them to move like a human would. And I can imagine in those days it would have been very fascinating and extremely kind of like out of this world for a lot of the people if they hadn't seen anything like it. They also had these theatres, horror theatres called Phantasmgoria, where they would project with these magic lamps, these special lamps, onto the walls, these ghostly figures and skeletons that would frighten people, especially if they haven't seen this before in their life. They would swoon and faint because they'd never seen anything like it. I guess you could say it was the earlier version of our horror movies that people would go to. The other thing I liked was the fact that the Welbeck Estate, which it's a real estate, one of the dukes who lived in there, William Cavendish himself, who was the 5th Duke of Portland, I think it was, he was so eccentric and reclusive. But he built these miles of tunnels underground for the entire estate. And in these tunnels you could walk through them and also put in even take a horse through them as well. They were huge, and that would go and open into a ballroom that was all underground, and a library all underground, and he would move through these underground tunnels. And if you search on YouTube right now, you could see people walking through these tunnels. It's just amazing to see what one person did on the estate. And I love the idea that the author had integrated all these stories, the Automatons, Welbeck Estate, the two magicians, Panetti, who was an illusionist in real life many years ago, and Philidor himself, who was the person who came up with these Phantasmgoria shows, and the fact that he did also work with Madame Tussaud for a little while, but their partnership fell flat at some stage. So she weaved in all these different real stories in a fictional account, which I loved. So it's given me more of an appreciation of entertainment of the early 1800s, and I love the story. It's well worth a read, but like I said, I did find the first half of the book a lot more exciting than the second, which was just really expanding on the characters and then pulling it together with that who shot Eleanor. Oops. Anyway, you'll have to just read it to find out more. So there you go. That's Tussaud by Belinda Lyons-Lee. Highly recommend. Bye for now.